Welcome, everyone, to yet another episode of The Cloud is Calling. We are here in season two, and I'm excited to be joined by my next guest, Mr. Aaron Turner, who is the SaaS CTO at Vectra AI. Aaron has a wealth of security technology history and information. So, Aaron, I am super excited that you have come on to be a guest on the show. How are you doing?
Doing awesome. Pleasure to join you. Love to collaborate with Trace 3. I've worked on a ton of projects with your teams and really excited about how your team, Trace 3, can help Vectra achieve our potential
Yeah,
and the other way around too. I think
it
there's
has
a great
been.
collaboration between, you sort of unicornish startups like Vectra AI and really good go-to-market partners like Trace 3.
No, you guys have been absolutely fantastic to work with. Not only you, but the rest of your team. And I cannot say enough how highly impressed we have been, especially from some of my fellow colleagues that I worked with who speak very highly of everything that Vector does and the way you guys go to market with us and with our clients. So I really appreciate that, and congratulations on some of the milestones that Vector has achieved recently. I remember seeing some posts about your guys' accomplishments, so we couldn't be happier for you guys, and excited to see what the future holds.
Awesome.
All right, well, let's dig into it. I would really love to talk about software security, but specifically, I want to dive into this area of we seem to be moving on from this notion of cloud access security brokers or CASBs, and they just don't seem to be enough these days to defend SaaS applications. What do you think is the natural progression, or why do you think the industry is starting to move beyond the CASB world, and where are we going in terms of defending SaaS applications?
So I've been doing security for a long time. I've been in this industry for 30 years. And any time an acronym reaches 10 years is dead. CASB's been around for more than 10 years now.
Yep.
Now, so there's, a macro view of whenever we try to do something in InfoSec, it's got a life cycle. It's got a shelf date when it's not going to be good anymore. Part of the reason why is because of the way that technologies evolve. Part of the reason is because of the way that certain major players in the ecosystem manipulate those technologies, sometimes to their benefit, sometimes their detriment. So if we take a look at CASBs, the promise of CASB 10 years ago was, hey, let's instrument all of these logs to come together and we can magically suss out by these breadcrumbs where people are going and what they're doing and what files they're accessing. And in the early days, it was really interesting because in a SaaS world, you sort of don't have to worry about the network anymore. You don't have to worry about all of the legacy components that you had to do, server logs, that sort of thing. It's just you get the SaaS telemetry, it's coming in, great. Well, where CASB fell short was the moment that the CASB folks tried to overreach by upselling CASB to be something else, to
Hmm.
be DLP. Right? I remember the first time I saw a CASB player mention, "Well, we do data loss prevention." It's like, no, you don't. You can tell somebody that something's left the building, but you
Yeah.
don't have a control in place to stop that from happening. It's missing the P in data loss prevention. And so the other thing that really impacted CASB was the moment when the SaaS providers started doing their own CASB thing. So let's take a look at what Microsoft did. They acquired Adallom,
Hmm.
Israeli-based CASB. And once Microsoft had their cloud CASB, which now they label as
Defender
Azure
for cloud
Defender
apps.
for Cloud Apps,
Hmm.
I think it's on its fifth rebrand now. Like we just keep stamping a new
It's like two
logo
or
in here.
three. Yeah, about two or
Okay.
three. Yeah.
So um, at that point in time, Microsoft did not have a good motivation to play nicely with the Netscopes or the Sky High McAfees or the
Hmm.
whatever. And so you saw some degradation in certain telemetry that they were relying on that Microsoft's like, no, we're not going to give you that anymore. And you started to see essentially the balkanization of SaaS to the point where, well, now you need it's like Salesforce is another really good example. You want to get Salesforce telemetry where you can really trace what's going on. Well, first you're gonna have to double your license per user. Second, you're gonna have to go and hire someone who's super awesome,
At
like
Salesforce. Yep.
at Salesforce, to figure out what the heck that stuff's talking about. And so now with that, essentially fragmentation of SaaS, there is no universal monitoring layer that matters. And
Mhm.
so I think if we take a look at that sort of case study, is CASB's trying to present themselves as DLP providers, there was this realization of, well, you've got to have a control surface. And
Mhm.
so that's when you saw the Netscopes try to compete against Zscaler. Right now, they're trying to be a service edge provider, not just
Mhm.
a CASB provider. Palo Alto is a good example too, where, and in fact, the first the first senior executive whoever told me that CASB was dead probably 5 or 6 years ago was a member of the Palo Alto team that
Oh,
was
wow.
working on Prisma. And it was interesting because I was like, well, wait a second, isn't Prisma like a CASB? Like, well, tell me why CASB is dead if you're trying to build that thing.
Yeah.
And so I think that that's essentially the ecosystem we're in, is that we're now so far past the point where telemetry can give us insights. We need to have a control plane, and CASB has no control plane.
No, that's I never knew probably a good half of half of that, but that's very interesting that the somebody on Palo's executive team was kind of saw the writing on the wall, so to speak, about 5 years ago. Um, One of the other big things I think in the SaaS application world is the MITRE framework, right? And you're talking about control planes and how do we help control that? And MITRE is a very popular and well-known control framework. Typically, I see defend that framework implemented more so than attack. And why do you think defend plays a bigger role in securing these cloud applications versus saying the MITRE attack framework?
Hmm. I'd actually challenge you on that. Like I think
Oh,
I think
okay.
so. Attack and defend are two different ends of the
Yeah,
spectrum,
red, blue team.
right?
Yep.
Yeah.
Mhm.
And attack has been around 3 times as long as defend has been,
Yes.
and so it just has a an advantage of time, and awareness and that sort of thing. So like if I were to go out and talk to a cloud security team and say, hey, tell me about what you're doing, I think I'd get more checkbox in their attack framework thought
Yep.
process
Mhm.
than I would from defend. So I think part of it is just because of time. But the other one is, like, if I look at the defend model, where you've got model, harden, detect, isolate, deceive. Um, I became part of the Vectra family as a result of an acquisition called Sirix. I was the founder of Sirix Security, which was the
Mhm.
first Microsoft 365 SaaS posture management platform. And so we were experts at how do you harden the Microsoft world, the Exchange Online, everything out there. And every time we went to go run our SaaS posture management platform inside of a tenant across thousands, we had thousands of organizations we were working with. And every time we went to go run our platform, there was a lot of anxiety about, well, you're essentially this PowerShell and Graph API thing. You know, should we run it in production? We're like, well, we're happy to run it in test. I would say maybe 10% of our prospects had a test environment.
Mhm.
And if you don't have a test environment, that means you can't model,
Nope.
right? So that's done, right? And most people didn't have the maturity to think through the fact that it's a shared responsibility model. And so when the CIO signed the Microsoft 365 contract, they're like, oh, Microsoft's helping us. It's all good. So they didn't do any hardening. They just took it. Right? They're just like, cool, this is awesome. And they didn't read the fine print about, well, you're responsible for
You're still
hardening.
responsible for your data, for your users, for your your
When I
access. Yep.
when I think, and so that was just from our Sirius perspective.
Mhm.
Right now, 18 months ago, we became part of the Vectra family, which is much more focused on detect and respond.
Yep.
And when we go out and talk to people about what their detection response capabilities are, 9 times out of 10, they'll say, oh, well, we're plumbing all of our Microsoft 365 logs back to QRadar. Like, really? Like, tell me more about how QRadar can consume the full telemetry off of an Exchange Online access. So, like, when someone goes to their iPhone, clicks on an email in their Outlook client, and selects that email, that one that one series of events creates over 100 breadcrumb trails inside of the Graph API. So you can't use a legacy SIM to do that, whether it's Splunk or Sumo Logic or whoever, Securonics. I'm not trying to single out just one of the legacy SIM providers, but none of them can consume that level of telemetry, because if you have 1,000 users reading 1,000 emails a day, now you've reached 1,000 to the thousandth power, and no one's going to consume that amount of telemetry. And so I was speaking with another good friend of mine who's his name is Rich Mogul. He now heads up the CSPM practice for Firemon, and I was talking with him about, tell me a little bit about what your view of the detect world is from the CSPM space. He's like, oh, well, everyone has gone through and turned on the logs to say, yes, we're going to log all of this stuff. But 9 times out of 10, no one's watching that stuff. It's just hitting a bin, and it's like, oh, we're doing it for compliance purposes. Okay, great. Isolation, right? So if we go to that
Mhm.
angle of defend, please tell me more about your Microsoft 365 isolation plan. Like there isn't one. You
Nope.
can't. You cannot throw a switch. Um, and Microsoft's own license agreement prevents you from deceiving. You can't run deception in Microsoft and abide by the Microsoft terms of service. Even in AWS, it's hard to run deception. You have to go through a whole bunch of stuff, and um,
A lot of hoops to jump through.
so so that's the reason why I think
Attack
we're in
attacks more.
we're in a attack has more penetration, more implementation from a
Hmm.
practitioner perspective than Defender does, because if you were to try to model, you're going to double your licensing costs sometimes, because you got to set up another tenant, you got to do some stuff, and not just licensing but operations costs too. Like managing multiple tenants is not a fun thing. Hardening is really difficult. People do not understand. Most even very mature security teams, when I start talking to them about hardening, truly hardening a SaaS tenant, they're like, "Well, if I do that, it's going to break all of my third-party calls out there." And it's like, well, I mean, maybe those third-party calls are not a good thing for your environment. Well, but we signed this Salesforce and Microsoft agreement, and they told us that it was going to be this secure platform. It was like, yeah, that's secure enough to let you pay for it.
Hmm. It
So
meets
so anyway, I
bare minimum requirements.
but maybe I'm just a pessimist. Maybe I'm just an old man saying, get off my lawn to these young whippersnappers in the cloud
Oh
environment.
no.
I
I
don't know.
Yeah. No, 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 no. Quite honestly, I think uh, from a SaaS world, defend is probably very difficult from a framework perspective. A more traditional cloud environment, when we're looking at IaaS and PaaS, right? Then we can have test environments, QA environments, non-prod environments, and you can isolate those and control access a little better from that perspective. So I think from when you're
I'd agree
looking
with
at,
that.
yeah, when you're securing your cloud applications, I think, there's securing the M365 applications with, yeah, attack, I think, is probably a much more suitable framework for that. And then you've got your applications that are running either on a VM or a container or a Kubernetes cluster, or, pick your workload that you've chosen to host it on. And right. And I think defend makes a bit more sense, but it's funny how I think when I have conversations with a lot of people, they seem to have them flip flopped, right? I hear more about defend in the M365 world, which is interesting because to your point, you can't do half of what defend wants you to do. And attack seems to be more on the actual cloud side, which doesn't make as much sense. So, um, but hey, maybe we're gonna come together in a purple team manner, and defend and attack will meld somewhere in between from that standpoint. You did bring up a great point though. When we talk about logging, everything is going to this giant bucket, data lake, data warehouse, something. Um, and this rise of cloud detection and response. And so far, people are doing a great job of detecting, but the R does not seem to be implemented. And I just want to know, why do you feel that organizations are? I mean, CDR is definitely becoming popular, but why are they struggling to actually implement that within their current security operations? What seems to be kind of some of the common blockers you see?
And again, I like to talk in macro terms, so I'm
No,
going to try
go
to
ahead.
zoom out and
Give
talk
me the
about
30,000 foot view, and we can zoom in some.
sys- systemic problems in infosec. And this is something that I get, having been in the industry for a long time, when I go speak at conferences and they're like, hey Aaron, you've been super successful security, how do I get into it, how do I be successful? And they're like, yeah, I'm just graduating with a master's degree in cybersecurity. I'm like, well, that's useless. Like, what? Why? Because most people go into cybersecurity like thinking that cybersecurity is a domain, and
Mhm.
and that's what you go do. And the first thing I tell folks is, look, put pause on this cybersecurity thing you're doing, take a step back and become a domain expert on something. Like, go and become a domain expert on AWS Lambda or Azure Key Management or something, right? Go
Yeah.
choose a domain and be successful there. Because what happens when responders, when the people on the security team go to do detect and respond, is they respond with sledgehammers when they should be responding with sniper shots. And so what ends up happening is the security team, in their effort to automate response with a sledgehammer that takes down a cluster of applications. And so the business doesn't trust them. The business side, the people who are running business processes, the ones who are serving clients are like, no, 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 security people, you don't get to touch that because you took us offline 2 weeks, 3 weeks ago, or 2 months ago, or whatever. So you stay in your corner. You can tell us when something bad's happening, but when we go to respond, we're going to respond together because you're infosec people. You don't know about my stuff. And so that, and obviously there's no perfect way to be really good at infosec and a super super domain expert. Like, it's not scalable, but it needs to be something where, a good lessons I learned. I spent 8 years at Microsoft in the worst times when Microsoft had global. We had an incident where 2 billion computers got infected in one day. Like, 2 billion computers being
I
infected to try
I
to
I
take
I
down
remember
things.
that day.
August, in
Yep.
fact, 20 years ago.
I was gonna say, we're coming up on the anniversary here pretty soon.
Yeah. It destroyed a whole year of my life. Like, there's a whole year of my life that essentially destroyed because of Blaster. But if we look at that situation, Blaster happened because Microsoft could not embed security into the production of software,
Mhm.
and so that you produce software that was bad. So the thing that we should think about in response is that security should probably be trying to embed response into the application team, because a lot of times security folks in their, maybe we're a little egotistical in the way we think about, we're security experts, we're gonna respond to this thing and to take care of it, when we should be delegating certain aspects of that to say, hey, let's let the experts run the sniper shot to solve this problem so we don't take down 3 Kubernetes clusters at once, or whatever is happening out there. So I think it's a problem in, our self-centered natures. It's a problem that we have not solved in 3 decades, and so we need to be better at collaborating to do response. And I think that's the gap that's missing. So if you evaluate secure, technology from a people, process, and technology perspective, we've got decent response automation tools, but they've
Mhm.
been used as sledgehammers, not sniper rifles. We 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 have people, but they're not properly coordinated, and the processes don't have the appropriate oversight or coordination and management. And so I think we can improve on all three aspects of people, process, and technology to make response happen. But there's no thing you can buy to do that. And that's what sort of stops a lot of things. Like, well, where's the platform I can buy to do that?
Where's
Well,
where's the where's the silver bullet that just make it all happen? Yeah.
I want to buy something. And what I'm afraid of, like my greatest fear in the announcements that have happened over the last 6 months, with this teaming up of ServiceNow and NVIDIA, their
Mhm.
AI partnership that they
Yep.
announced,
Mhm.
I'm afraid that ServiceNow is going to come forward and say, we have your response silver bullet. Our artificial intelligence is trained on so many incidents that we're going to do this thing for you. And at that point, we've reached Skynet for IT, right? We will now have Arnold Schwarzenegger sitting
Yeah.
behind the keyboard doing really bad things. Um, and so that, unfortunately, most business leaders want a line item they can purchase to solve that, when in fact it's a cultural change, it's a responsibility change, it's a coordination change. It's much harder. So I think we're still a long ways away from having automated response. Now, the
Mhm.
investments that Vectra has made is that we believe that the um, the behavioral AI that we've invested in, can help coordinate response across on-prem and virtual machines in traditional VMs and serverless inside of Lambda. And so we believe that there's a unifying principle where attackers do things that are very similar in behavior across all the environments. They do things like reconnaissance. They do things like lateral movement. They do things like elevation of privilege and exfiltration of data. All those things are common across any environment. And so our approach at Vectra has been, let's invest in that behavioral AI so we can help the defenders keep up with the generative AI that's coming out to help attack those things. And so that's where we believe we fit into that ecosystem, is that we are the behavioral AI to help defend against the generative AI that's going to be coming against you in those different environments.
Do battle with fire against fire, right?
That's what you got to do, right? When
Yeah,
what,
no,
what
that's
happens when
that's a
someone rolls up with a machine gun? Well, you better have a machine gun too. What happens
yeah,
when someone
no,
comes with a tank? Well, you better
there
have
you
a
go.
tank. So,
Yep.
you've got to be prepared. And so, I think this aspect of investment in AI, it has to be made. Like, it's not an optional thing. And now, whether an organization partners with someone like us at Vectra, or they go out and try to do their own open source thing, I was doing some interesting just research into how I could use the Power Automate platform inside of the
Yeah.
Microsoft Cloud. Power
Hmm.
Automate now has um, OpenAI components built into Power Automate, so you can
It
actually
does.
run detections and response based upon OpenAI stuff inside of Power Automate, um, which is both awesome and terrifying at the same time.
Well,
Um,
it's funny that you mentioned that because recently I was playing around with Power Automate on how to do some detection and responses from Microsoft Defender for Cloud Apps. So if we're bringing this full circle, yeah, it was one of the lab things I was playing around with about malicious user sending an email with a malicious attachment, whatever, and Defender for Cloud Apps picking that up and then kicking the alert over to Power Automate and Power Automate running a sequence of events to alert the user, alert the manager, is this legitimate, and then remediating that threat. So yeah, it's quite interesting what Power Automate is capable of doing now that they've got these kind of open AI capabilities, and I'm sure as time goes on, they'll expand some of those use cases in terms of Copilot, right? As everything is now being
mhm.
branded under Microsoft from an AI perspective. Uh,
Yeah,
Looking forward to it. I'm interested to play around with it and see. Aaron,
I think
before I let you go, I want to
yeah,
get your thoughts on one last thing because this seems to be a struggle for a lot of organizations, and hopefully you know where I'm going. And this is around identity security. Identity, for whatever reason, seems to just be that area that no organization I think does very well. There are some that do it a little bit better than others, but why do you think so many organizations struggle with this one discipline more than I think any other? What makes identity so unique in terms of addressing
again, I'll go into old man mode here for a moment.
it?
Okay, so my lucky break happened in 1998 when I was invited to join the team that developed the first version of Active Directory. So I went from being this sort of white hat hacker dude who got invited to join probably one of the coolest projects in the late 90s as far as
Hmm.
transforming authentication and authorization. And when we when one of the all hands meetings that we had at Microsoft, Steve Ballmer stated that our feature spec was to destroy Novell. Like it wasn't necessarily a positive thing; it was like a negative thing, right?
Hmm.
Um, and I guess mission accomplished.
I
Okay,
guess, yeah.
so
I mean,
um,
it was
but
successful.
what happened was with Active Directory is it sort of got included in the Microsoft Windows Server licensing ecosystem, and
Hmm.
so CIOs perceived that their identity problem was solved because, well, wait, we paid for that with our Microsoft license. We have Active Directory, that's identity, which is not identity. Active Directory does authentication and a little of authorization, but it doesn't do identity lifecycle management. It doesn't do privileged user management. It didn't do federation for a long time.
Nope.
And so what happened was for 20 years, IT leadership thought that they were solving for identity, but they weren't. And so now, in the last I would say 7 years, identity is the perimeter. And so, in a world where identity is the perimeter and your on-prem firewalls don't do you any good, let's take a look at the market research about how much money has been spent on perimeter firewalls, on how many people have been hired to manage firewalls, how many, let's take a look at that discipline. Trillions of dollars, like
Oh, yeah.
not billions, trillions of
Trillions.
dollars spent on
Yep.
people, technology, operating, all that stuff. And I was talking with a friend at Forrester over at RSA this year, and I asked her, like, what do you think the cumulative spend on identity has been over the last 20 years? And it's not trillions of dollars.
Oh,
Like,
I would
it's
be lucky if it cracked a
maybe
billion.
billions. Yeah,
Maybe.
maybe a
Maybe.
B.
Yeah.
So let's look at the investment that has been made.
Mhm.
Trillions of dollars in perimeter,
Lucky if it's a
billion
billion.
maybe in identity,
Yeah.
but that's our new perimeter now.
Mhm.
And so, as a result, number one, we've got 20 years of technical debt. Like in interactions I've had with thousands of organizations around the world, everyone just flipped the switch and said, "Oh, I'm gonna use AD connector to connect into Azure AD, and I'm gonna sync it up there, and it's just gonna be happy and good." It's like, you're insane. Like that is literally the worst thing you could ever do. You've taken all of your legacy garbage inside of this 20-year-old Active Directory domain, and you've now
And
just
put it
thrown it
into a
up
brand
willy
new
nilly.
car. Yep.
Awesome. Okay, congratulations. You're going to be screwed again. And
Yep.
so I think that's the first thing we have to look. The first filter we have to look at is how screwed we are. We are utterly screwed because of technical debt, underinvestment, not enough people. Like, how many people, if you went out 10 years ago and said, "Hey, do you want to be an identity architect?" They're like, "What the hell's an identity architect? Like,
Yep.
you mean like an Active Directory administrator?" No, that's not what I mean. I mean someone who's looking at identity. Now, what do we do about that? And and so I think the NSA in December of 2020 declassified one of the most important documents, I think, in the history of identity. And it was the TTPs associated with the Russian attack against U.S. Treasury in March of 2020.
Mhm.
So when the Russians got into U.S. Treasury, they persisted for 8 months before the NSA found them. So first, how bad is identity when Russians can persist for 8 months before somebody discovers them? It sucks, right?
Yep.
So in that paper, the NSA said, if you are using Microsoft Online Services for email, Teams, OneDrive, whatever, you should never have a hybrid environment. Get rid of your hybrid immediately. Make yourself Azure AD native as soon as you can, and and essentially what you're doing is you're reducing your identity attack surface. You're
Yeah.
getting rid of the third-party identity providers. You're getting rid of ADFS. You're getting rid of on-prem AD, and you're essentially transforming yourself. And when I deliver that message to people, there's a lot of gasps. And number one is because there's a lot of legacy Active Directory administrators who fear for their jobs. So this isn't just a potential transforming. It's like, well, wait a second. Well, what am I going to do here? Like, if we're not going to be on-prem AD, like, do I have a job here anymore? And so there's a very visceral response by the legacy AD folks, from like a preservation of their livelihood perspective. But also, the only thing that Azure AD shares in common with on-prem AD is a brand. Like, it is a completely different thing. There's no GPOs. Like, you don't have group policy objects, and you have these things called conditional access policies. And trying to do a conditional access policy analysis, like, that's completely. At least with GPOs, you could set up a debugger on a system and watch how
Yep.
the GPO is trickling down.
Mhm.
With conditional access policies, I like. I think
You set
if
it
I
up in
were,
audit mode and you watch
you
how it
hope,
does.
and maybe you have some chicken bones you throw on the floor, and you get the spirits of Azure AD tell you what's going on. Um, anyway, so I think the fact that we're underinvested in the past, we have this technical debt, we have a new technology that's hard to understand for a lot of people, we have so much noise in the market, like you have Okta and Jump Cloud and all of these different players out there trying to position themselves as we are the enterprise leader in identity.
Mhm.
It's just so distracting. And so I think number one is I would say to focus, follow the NSA guidance. If you're using if you're using Microsoft Cloud Services to collaborate, don't use any. Get rid of all third-party identity providers. Get rid of them. They're not going to help you at all. They're only going to add attack surface. Number
Yeah.
two, make sure that Azure AD is as clean as possible. That whatever you've imported from your legacy Active Directory, clean that stuff up. You get, go through and chop service accounts, chop, all this stuff that's been uploaded in there, and just chop it all. Now, reasonably, organizations cannot be completely Azure AD. There's always going to be some legacy components. And so I'm a huge fan of the guidance from Microsoft where you stand up a new forest, an on-prem forest, and you move everything that's not Azure AD capable into that forest. So essentially you completely jettison all of your technical debt with regards to AD. You move
Hmm.
all of those on-prem AD reliant systems into that new forest. And now you create a one-way trust between Azure AD and that forest. So what you've now done is you've eliminated those attack surfaces and you've created the instrumentation where if you have made the investments in Defender for cloud apps and other things, one of the things that's nice about Moon Azure AD is compared to CASB's, where we started this conversation, is you
Yep.
now have a control surface. You have a
Yes.
control surface where you can implement things with much better traceability, where you can do conditional access policies to prevent someone from logging in if certain events are met, or to enforce phishing resistant MFA, or doing things to significantly uplevel that identity hygiene. And so I think from a uh, from an ecosystem perspective, we've got to be much more efficient at informing senior IT leadership about the fact that we need to have good identity supply chain. We need to have a clean identity supply chain. We need to move towards better telemetry and monitoring of how those identities are being used, and whether you use a system like Defender for Cloud Apps or the Vectra CDR. We've got a cloud detection response for Azure AD component that we can
Yep.
that we use. Um, you got to get that together. So um, I'm kind of passionate about this. I don't know if you
I
noticed
I
that.
I would have never known with uh but no, yeah, no, it's definitely an area again near and dear to my heart. I couldn't agree with you more in terms of having legacy technical debt in from on-prem AD and just jettisoning that into and I'll use the right terminology now since Microsoft decided to rebrand it, Entra ID. Um, it's yeah, I mean it's garbage in, garbage out. And if you're not going to take the effort to clean it up, make sure that you're eliminating all of the things you don't need, and putting a clean, I want to say relatively clean slate, but cleaner state into Entra ID. And then, yeah, to your point, anything that's still on prem necessary, right? Just totally new forest, move it all over there so it's away and separate. And it's still a hybrid architecture, but you're significantly, to your point, right? Reducing that risk on not only the cloud identity, but also the on prem identities that are still necessary, at least for a little while. And hopefully, eventually you'll move off some of those things, depending on your roadmap and business use cases. uh Aaron, thank you so much for sharing your passion. I would absolutely love to have a further conversation just around identity. I think that would be fantastic. So maybe we'll see what we can do about that maybe down in a future season. Thank you, thank you, thank you so much for coming on. I really appreciate it. And any other parting words for our audience before we head out?
We've talked about a lot of really transformational things over the last 30 minutes or however
Yep.
long we've been talking. And so I think the message I would have to listeners would be, don't let your fear of massive transformation stop you from iterating towards the good. Don't let the fear of the perfect in cloud identity stop you from making iterative improvements, because the number of incidents that we're involved in from a cleanup perspective are all happening because no one did anything. Maybe it's just complete apathy when it came to hardening their cloud identity environment or hardening their SaaS environment. And so I think, do something. And
Yeah.
and luckily DHS has made some great publications with their scuba guides, and so that helps chunk it down to where it's like, okay, I can do these 10 things for Azure, I can do these 10 things for Exchange, and so do the little bit you can. Don't let
Hmm.
the fear of the monolith of change stop you, because we have got to make a change. Like this
Portion
latest
control.
Microsoft incident, um, the Microsoft incident was announced last week, where
Yes.
the
Hmm.
attackers got a signing credential and
Hmm.
essentially replayed it against from Outlook, played it into Outlook Web Access. That all happened because very few organizations were actually monitoring how those identities were being used. By the grace of God, US government smart people discovered that was happening and got in the middle of it. Who
Yeah.
knows how many organizations could have been? And it's all because no one did anything. So
Yeah.
my invitation to listeners is do something, do a little bit. Every little bit you can do will make a difference.
No, wise words. Take portion control, right? Take small bites and they'll eventually add up and it'll make the monolith seem that much smaller. Aaron, thank you so much. That is
Thank you.
absolutely sound advice. And folks, remember to tune in. We've got lots more fun in season 2, and I promise you won't be disappointed. So take care, folks. And remember, the cloud is calling.